The plan that was decided on was to shoot up a school in Belize.
So, when you say shoot up a school, do you mean kill the primary school children in the school?
Children, teachers, yes.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 207. The Irish Film Festival commences on the 1st of May in Sydney, and one of the highlight films in this year's program is Unquiet Graves, a documentary that explores the role the British government played in the murders of 120 Irish Catholics during the Glenanne Gang campaign of the 1970s. Thorough, chilling and illuminating investigating filmmaking, Unquiet Graves is also a timely reminder that there can never be retribution until there is truth. Joining me now on the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast to talk about Unquiet Graves is the film's director, Sean Murray. Sean, I thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
So I guess my first question was that in regards to the Troubles and all the different stories and tragedies that have come from that event in your country's history, what was it about this specific time and these specific crimes that really caught your attention and wanted you to investigate further?
Well, it was actually the scale of the Glenanne series. I always wanted to make a documentary on collusion, which an overarching story on collusion, because there are many instances of collusion. But the Glenanne series for me was a major one, because I'd read Anne Cadwallader's book, and that had really made my mind up for me that it wasn't only the scale of the amount of people killed, it was the involvement of, the level of involvement of policemen and British Army members of the UDR that were involved in these killings, you know.
And when it comes to getting the film up and running, I read that crowdfunding was something that you actually looked into. I've talked to a lot of independent filmmakers, and I've had different reactions in regards to using crowdfunding as a funding source. How did you find the experience of doing crowdfunding to get your project going? Well,
first of all, we had organised a main night to make calls out, to put calls out for fundraising. That was in the Europa Hotel in Belfast, and we'd gathered families and friends, and we'd had a number of people who give their services for free in regards to entertainment, etc. And we raised a small bit of money to get the campaign going, but it really took 4 years to make the film, and that was due to financial constraints. We had to just wait until we could raise more money to get the film finished. I could have finished the film maybe 2 years into the project, but I had a vision for the film, and I wasn't going to rush it until I had the right amount of money and, of course, the right people involved, or the right collaboration of so many different great artists involved in the film, you know.
4 years on the project, that is a long time to work on a film, and I'm sure during that time you covered a lot of ground, you had a lot of information. But I'm curious though, where do you begin? What was the first person you reached out to in regards to getting the material needed for this project?
Well, it would have been the author of the Lethal Allies book, who was Anne Cadwallader. Once I had read the book, I contacted Anne Cadwallader and said to her, could she make an introduction to one of the human rights groups, the Pejkovic Centre, which would give me inroads into speaking to family members. And once I had made that contact, they were happy to speak to me, and really it snowballed from there. I think the big meeting for me was when we had organised a meeting with all the family members in Benburb in County Tyrone, and I'd impressed upon the family members what I had intended to do, and that I hope to get their stories to an international audience. And really, from that day, it's been a daily grind, but we've got there in the end, and we've surpassed actually what we've set out to do. We've got a major TV deal. The film will be streaming from next month around the world. So we're delighted how the film has been going, and it's been widely and greatly received here in Ireland, actually.
Throughout the film, you have interviews, you have archive footage. In regards to the interviews, some of the testimony from victims, the families of victims, is simply heartbreaking. I think the one that really stuck with me was that from Margaret Campbell, her story about the murder of her husband. I mean, that was just absolutely riveting, powerful, and sad stuff. When you are in the room with Margaret and you're hearing this story, does it really hit you, the ramifications and the responsibility that you have as a filmmaker to get these stories out there to the public?
Well, it does, yes. I think that's always a question that I'm asked. I always look at it that these type of post-conflict documentaries are made on the most by journalists, and I think generically they're a lot of them are they're quite the same. I think this is a very different documentary because I come from a straight filmmaking background, but I've also had family members of my own killed by the state, and I think that's one of the reasons why the family members were so comfortable with me. I don't think it would be very difficult for a journalist to get that type of that honesty and the testimony of Margaret Campbell. I just thought that I built a good rapport with the victims, and you're absolutely right. I have never seen a more powerful testimony in my life, and it's an absolute honour for me to bear witness to that,
On the other end of the spectrum, you have an interview with John Weir. He was a whistleblower. He was a police officer who at the time took part in these killings. I think the most kind of astonishing thing that I saw from the documentary was his confession in regards to a potential attack on a primary school that I remember. I guess my question is similar to the one beforehand. Once you hear that information put to you, what type of reaction do you have towards that?
Well, it's very difficult when you hear something like that from a whistleblower and someone who was actually proposed to be involved in an attack where all the primary school children in the school were going to be attacked and killed. I mean, I immediately thought of Beslan, if you can remember Beslan in Dagestan, where the primary school children were killed by the terrorists there. And it just struck me how close we really were to coming to an all-out civil war during the conflict in the north of Ireland,
When I watched your film, like I mentioned before, interviews, archive footage, you also have recreations, dramatic recreations in there. When did it come to the decision that you thought that recreations was needed to bring forth some of these stories to life? Because you did have a lot of information to work with. I was really curious in regards to how that decision came about. And does filming dramatic recreations of these stories, does that bring about a different part of the filmmaking brain in regards to how you approach your stories as a filmmaker?
Well, yes, dramatic recreations are it's a very dodgy thing to do when you're involved in documentary, because when you often think of dramatic recreations, you think of like Discovery Channel documentaries and other kind of satellite TV documentaries, and to be quite truthful, they're pretty awful. So it's a gamble to use dramatic reconstructions in documentary. I'd wanted to, because I wanted to bring people back 40 odd years right to the scene of the crime. But I knew that it was very, very sensitive. And if we take Margaret Campbell's testimony, for example, to have something so powerful, dramatic reconstruction could actually undermine the testimony of Margaret. So what we had done is we had shot the dramatic reconstructions, and we went to edit. And to be quite truthful, I have to give a lot of credit to my editor. It's a man called John Phillipson,
yes,
who's just an absolutely fantastic editor. Another reason why I wanted John Phillipson was because that he was an English editor, and that I didn't want anyone from the north of Ireland to be editing the documentary who had known too much about the conflict there. I want someone with a fresh eye, because he kept me right, because I assumed too much of the audience, and I always needed to think internationally. And John Phillipson was the man, besides being just one of the best editors I've ever worked with,
That's really interesting. So, if you did have someone, say, from Northern Ireland who played the part of editor in your production, do you think that the overall tone of the film would have been different?
Most definitely. I just think when you know so much about a subject, you assume too much. And the big thing for me was getting this film to an international audience, because you have a lot of acronyms in this film: the RUC, the UVF, the IRA. And sometimes you skim over that. You assume that the audience knows too much. And I'm giving an international context to the crimes of what happened, the British state crimes of what happened in Ireland. So I had to give an international colonial context to that also. So I always had the eye on the international audience when I was doing this, and I needed an editor who was far removed from that.
You also used narration. You had Stephen Ray, who I think who in himself is worthy of a feature-length documentary. He's had such an interesting life and interesting career. How did he become involved in production? Was that something much later down the line that you reached out to him to have some narration on your project?
Well, if you see the beginning of the film, there's the Seamus Heaney poem actually, which is in the documentary. That Seamus Heaney wrote a poem called "The Strand at Loch Beg" about his cousin who was killed by the Glenanne Gang. And once I had read the poem, it was pretty powerful. It was the first time that I'd read the poem, and right away I thought about Stephen Ray, because I know that Stephen Ray was a friend of Seamus Heaney, and of course Stephen has this beautiful voice for narration. There would have been no better choice. So I approached Stephen about reciting the Heaney poem, and of course he agreed, as long as the Heaney family had agreed to recite the poem. And when I had Stephen on board, I began to have more confidence in the project, and moved on then to get one of the finest actually animators in the world, a guy called Peter Strain, who does a lot of work all around the world at the minute, and we'd worked together to cut the poem out for the Seamus Heaney recital, and he had animated something that we had shot for that poem. And to be quite truthful, it's just a pretty powerful, as you probably have seen yourself, ending film, you know.
I would agree 100% in that. Ending the film with that poem, with that animation, I think was the perfect way to kind of bring, because it's interesting you're saying you have the different acronyms, you have the different elements, it all really comes down to the people in the end, especially the people affected. And I think that poem really brought it all together at the end, and it was just terrific how you did that.
Sorry, just a quick note on that. I think what happens with political documentaries, in a sense, is that you give your version of events. As a filmmaker, obviously I have my baggies, and I give my version of events of what's happened on a particular historical incident. I obviously have all the elements to bring that narrative together, but what usually happens is a generic ending. You allow talking heads to sum up the ending towards the documentary. And I never wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. I wanted to bring people right back down to what it's about. It was about the victims, and no better way to do it than to use animation, because for me, animation can it's very, very personal, and you can make what you want from it, you know.
I think what this film also does is it's a film of revelations. I think a lot of information is going to be new to fresh eyes, like people like myself and other people, I'm sure, at Irish Film Festival are going to listen to some of these things. The idea of the British government having paramilitary gangs murdering people for no apparent reason but of their religious backgrounds is quite something. Throughout the documentary, there was, you guys talked about, there was over 30 people who were named in reports. I'm just curious, of those 30 people, of those people that were named in different reports in regards to the Glenanne gangs, has there ever been a conviction? Has there ever been an arrest or anything like that?
Yeah, there have been a number of convictions, but I'll give you an idea. There was the police officers who were involved in the Rock Bar attack. They were convicted for something else, and the judge that you'd seen in the film told it made his summing up. Sorry, when they were be sentenced, where they got a suspended sentence actually for attempted murder, the attempted mass murder. Actually, they were given a suspended sentence, where the judge says these police officers were under a lot of stress, and they were only trying to rid the land of pestilence. So collusion wasn't just about individual acts of people colluding with loyalist paramilitaries and carrying out attacks. It run right to the judiciary. You know, here you have a judge who is sentencing police officers who were involved in the attempted mass murder of people, saying that they were the ones under stress, and more or less giving them the go-ahead for any further attacks to happen, you know.
How far to the top does this go, Sean? Was there any information that you came across that maybe you couldn't put forth in a documentary that people should know? I mean, is there further evidence, or do you think there will be the opportunity of further evidence to come forth that will show that maybe this goes higher than people have ever realised?
But it's very, very difficult to see how far it went up the line, but it definitely went to the furthest echelons of British military intelligence. There's no doubt about that. And I believe certain prime ministers knew about these events. It's difficult because the documents are being hidden, they're being redacted, the documents are going missing. So it's quite a task to find out how hard it, it went to when you have the people that were involved hold all the documents, and of course are deciding to redact these documents for 75 years plus.
You spoke before about how this film is going to go international. It is going to be streaming. We've seen of late, just in regards to documentary filmmaking, docu-series, crime documentary series, that when these documentaries get out there, when the information gets out there, the reaction to it is very swift from the public, especially on something like social media, for example. People really demand answers for questions which have long been ignored. Do you have a feeling, or do you hope that when Unquiet Graves does go out there on streaming, for example, that the reaction from the British government will be much more transparent than what has been given so far?
No, I don't think the British government will be transparent at all, because this film isn't just about a historical incidents in Ireland. It has ramifications for what the British government is doing at the minute. So we know that the British government are funding the Saudi Arabian government and selling them arms, which is creating a serious number of deaths in Yemen and elsewhere. Their exploits in Iraq and, of course, Afghanistan, etc. So it has ramifications for what they're doing at the minute, and there's no way that the British government will change anything because of Unquiet Graves. But what we will do is keep the international eye on the British government and pressurise them and make them think that whatever they're doing around the world is going to be much more difficult because of the films like these, which will bring some moral bearing on what the British government not only have been up to historically, but what they're doing at the minute.
My final questions, I want to just approach on the Ireland of today and how they can reconcile with the tragedies of the past and move forward. I myself come from a Croatian background. So when when the troubles were happening in my parents' country of Croatia, there was a civil war happening there as well. So I can really understand the struggle between getting over the past, but also trying not to forget what happened in the past as well. Through your eyes, as both an Irishman and a filmmaker, and who's so steep into this project now for the last 4 years, what's it like now with the younger generation who didn't go through these times, but are always reminded about what did happen? Did you find that perhaps they are forgetting about the past and the struggles that a lot of people went through, or is it up to a person such as yourself to constantly remind them about all the things that has happened and to never forget about that?
Well, this is the big dilemma, you see, Matthew, and we also look at examples from Croatia, the former Yugoslavia, etc. When we have our eye on filmmaking projects like this, I look at the likes of the work in former Yugoslavia and the work of the likes of Patricio Guzman in Chile, because what Patricio Guzman's work has done in Chile is it has opened up a window to the past of what happened with the Salvador Allende government, and how not only has the memory of Allende himself been disappeared, it's also, there's a cultural gap in the memory of Chile, where the younger generation just do not know what had happened. It's a complete void, a gap in the cultural memory there. So what we're doing with Unquiet Graves is quite similar to the likes of Chile and to the likes of the former Yugoslavia, because you have this argument that we should just forget about the past and move on. But I see things differently. I think that we need to educate a younger generation and show them how far we were into the, how far we were involved in the conflict, how close we were to a civil war, and let them know that things are much, much better. And I think that children should be politicised about their past and about where they're going in the future, but never radicalised. And if we do that sensitively through the arts, I think it can make a major contribution to conflict transformation.
Final question. There was an interesting scene, very brief one though, where Bono from U2 was in the documentary, and he mentioned a line that really stuck with me, and I did quote it in my introduction. He said how can there be resolution without truth? Is the hope that documentaries like Unfriended Graves and movies like last year's No Stone Unturned, etc., is the hope that will bring resolution to these crimes of the past?
Well, what you have is there's two semblances of justice for families. One is through the criminal justice system and one is through the filmmaking process. The criminal justice system is constrained when you have documents hidden, and the British government are trying to hide the truth. So that can only go so far. And the families will, in my view, they won't get the justice that they need through the criminal justice system. So what filmmaking does is that it allows a voice for their loved ones, and it doesn't constrain that voice. And when we see the stories of their loved ones forever immortalised through these images, at least we're saying to these people, we'll never forget you. And
so for everyone out there, Unfriended Graves, one of the great films playing at the Irish Film Festival. You can find more details at irishfilmfestival.com.au. And Sean, I understand you actually will be coming down to Australia to introduce screenings of the film. Is that correct?
That's correct. I arrive in Australia on Tuesday morning, and I'll be in Sydney for 9 days before I go to Melbourne to both Irish Film Festivals.
For everyone out there, please check out Unquiet Graves. Check out Sean Murray doing introductions for the film. He's one of the... It's a powerful documentary, and I think the revelations in his documentary is going to really educate a lot of people and illuminate a lot of people, as it did myself. And Sean Murray, I thank you very much for your time, and best of luck with your trip in Australia as well.
Thanks very much, Matthew.